SITREP World Briefing for July 22, 2026. The United States carried out a renewed round of strikes on Iran on Tuesday, extending military action into an 11th consecutive night. President Donald Trump said Washington had no interest in talks with Tehran and warned that the next U.S. target could be Iran's underground Pickaxe Mountain nuclear complex. The combination of continued strikes and a direct threat against a hardened nuclear facility marked a further escalation in a conflict that has already widened beyond exchanges and into a sustained U.S. air campaign. Pickaxe Mountain has emerged as a strategically important target because underground nuclear facilities are designed to survive conventional bombardment and preserve sensitive parts of a nuclear program during war. By publicly naming the complex, Trump signaled that the United States was prepared to threaten infrastructure at the center of Iran's nuclear deterrence posture. The refusal to pursue talks at the same moment raised the stakes for Tehran, regional U.S. partners, and energy markets because any attack on a deeply buried site could trigger a broader military response and further reduce the space for diplomacy. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday dismissed Army Chief Oleksandr Syrsky in Kiev after days of protests in the capital and other cities, in one of the biggest changes to Ukraine's military leadership since Russia's full-scale invasion. The decision turned a battlefield command dispute into a national political event, because the commander-in-chief's position sits at the center of Ukraine's war planning, force management, and relations between the presidency and frontline units. The firing was more than a personnel change. It was a response to street mobilization at a time when Ukraine's military leadership has had to balance casualties, recruitment, and operational demands under relentless Russian pressure. By replacing the top commander now, the president is seeking to stabilize both the armed forces and public confidence, while signaling that battlefield performance and accountability remain politically inseparable in Kyiv. French Environment Minister Monique Barbutte said she would resign after Parliament approved a contentious farm law that opens the way to the temporary reintroduction of two disputed pesticides. Barbutte said she would submit her resignation to President Emmanuel Macron following the bill's final adoption. The legislation is controversial because it permits the return of chemicals that critics say harm pollinators, including bees. For Macron's administration, the episode also threatens to deepen tensions between rural constituencies seeking regulatory relief and voters who expect stricter safeguards on biodiversity and public health. The resignation matters beyond the environment portfolio because agriculture has become one of the most politically sensitive areas in France, where governments often struggle to reconcile European and domestic environmental targets with pressure from farmers over input costs, yields, and competition. Barbutte's decision may force Macron to clarify whether his government sees the pesticide measure as a temporary concession or as a broader shift in policy. The UK government said bus fares across most of England will be capped at $2.70 from January, restoring a limit that ministers said would help households with living costs. The announcement reverses the increase made in 2025 under Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The policy applies across most of England rather than the whole United Kingdom, reflecting the fragmented structure of public transport in which devolved governments, local authorities, and private operators often work under different rules. In practical terms, a uniform cap can make a noticeable difference on frequent short-distance trips, especially in towns and smaller cities where buses are the main form of public transport. The restoration of the 2.70 £2 cap is also politically significant because bus fares are one of the few highly visible prices that central government can influence directly and quickly. For labor, the decision is intended to show immediate action on day-to-day costs, while reinforcing the role of buses in regional mobility, labor market access, and cleaner transport choices across England. Firefighters in Guadalajara, Spain, continued battling the La Mierla wildfire on Tuesday as flames tore through central Spain and scorched up to 30,000 hectares. The blaze forced more than 1,200 people to flee, highlighting the scale of an emergency that has spread across a large stretch of countryside in Guadalajara province. The La Mierla fire has become one of the most significant wildfire emergencies in Spain this week, combining rapid territorial spread with large-scale evacuations in a region that sits between Madrid and the country's northeastern interior. Firefighters have had to confront a blaze already measured in the tens of thousands of hectares, a threshold that turns a local fire response into a broader civil protection operation. In practical terms, the evacuation of more than 1,200 residents means authorities must manage road access, shelter, and the protection of scattered rural communities, while crews try to slow the fire's advance. Wildfires of this size in inland Spain carry consequences beyond the immediate fire front because they threaten forests, farmland, transport links, and small municipalities that rely on limited access roads. The current operation in Guadalajara has therefore become both a firefighting challenge and a test of how Spain's emergency services coordinate aerial assessment, ground crews, and evacuations during the peak summer season. Thousands of hectares have already been lost, and displaced residents are waiting for conditions that would allow a safe return. Firefighters in southern France said a fast-moving wildfire had been contained after it spread across southeastern communities, burned through 2,550 hectares, and forced hundreds of residents from their homes. Regional Fire Chief Eric Groen said the blaze was contained on Wednesday, although hot spots remained, indicating that crews still faced a significant cleanup and monitoring operation even after halting the main advance of the fire. The response drew nearly 1,000 firefighters. Authorities had ordered evacuations as the fire spread across hundreds of hectares and moved toward populated areas, a pattern that often forces emergency services to divide resources between attacking the fire front and protecting homes. Even after containment, lingering hotspots can reignite under wind or heat, which is why French fire services typically keep large numbers of personnel deployed after the most dramatic phase appears to have passed. For France, a fire that burns 2,550 hectares and drives mass evacuations in the southeast is part of a wider summer pattern in which Mediterranean landscapes become vulnerable to sudden wind-driven outbreaks. By Wednesday, the priority had shifted from stopping the initial spread to securing the perimeter, preventing flare-ups, and preparing for the longer recovery process for residents who had to leave their homes during the height of the emergency. Sources and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.